Hi everyone, this is Emily Zeimet, and for my first Rhetoric in Practice assignment, I decided to do a TED Youth Talk entitled Why You Should Be a Climate Change Activist. So on the next slide, I have included Neubauer's speech at the TED Youth Talk. However, I'm not going to play that for you. I'm just going to provide little pieces that I thought were important from her speech and give you just a little bit of background information as well as summaries of what it is Neubauer was trying to do in giving this speech at a TED Youth Talk. So I found this speech to be very powerful and a great example of how powerful rhetorical speech can be. Luisa Neubauer is a 23-year-old from Germany, and throughout her life, she was taught here and there about climate change and climate-related issues, but she often found herself frustrated because these conversations were crammed into single geography lessons. So she was both eager to learn more and frustrated that something so important was a little bit dismissed. So Neubauer's goal in her TED Talk was to educate people about climate change beyond the simple thought that the world isn't in a very good state. So she starts right off with a powerful speech where she says, "We are at a point in history that the most destructive force on the planet is humanity itself. We are at a point in history that no scientist could guarantee you that you will survive this. We are at a point in history that humanity is creating an environment that is not safe for humans anymore." As I mentioned, the link to Neubauer's speech is embedded here in the PowerPoint. It's about 17 minutes long, so I'm not going to play it for this presentation, but I do, if you have any interest or don't really know a whole lot about climate change and the climate change activism that's going on in the world, I highly suggest that you watch this. But to put this presentation into context, I do think it's important for me to just briefly go over what climate change is. So, as a result of human activities, the Earth's climate is now changing faster than ever, and it's already resulted in a wide range of impact across every region of the world. Many sectors of the economy that are impacting climate change are expected to continue to grow and impact it further. So, to combat climate change, there are a lot of good developments happening around the world, but these processes are slow. Two of those that Neubauer touches on are wind and solar energy. However, she makes it clear that those changes that are happening slowly are not enough. The last 5 years have been the hottest on record. Global emissions have never been higher than they are right now. And these emissions are greenhouse gases that are being released into the atmosphere. This is often a result of fossil fuel combustion, deforestation, and land use change. Climate change and climate change activism, I believe, are more relevant now more than ever, and I believe that it's very relevant to the people in this class. Children and young people all over the world are protesting climate change and demanding action. Recent protests have turned out an estimate 4 million protesters angry at world leaders for the state of the world. And these protesters are set out with the goal to put political pressure on government and corporations that contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions. Again, I don't want to make any assumptions about how often you all keep up with current events or watch or read the news, but for those of you who do keep up with what's going on around the world, this face might be familiar. This is Greta Thunberg. She is a 16-year-old climate change activist. In August of 2008, when she was just 15 years old, she started a school strike for the climate outside of the Swedish parliament. And since she started this, her movement has involved over 100,000 school children. This movement is called Fridays for Future, where young people get out and protest climate change and demand that their government takes them seriously. Thunberg has spoken at climate rallies in Stockholm, Helsinki, Brussels, and London. And very recently, in September of 2019, Greta gave a speech at the UN Climate Action Summit in New York. At the UN climate conference, Greta was angry, and she made that very clear to the audience. She had many notable quotes from her speech, but this one that I'm going to read to you, I believe, is one of the most powerful from her entire speech. Addressing the older populations and the members of the government, she said, "You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you, and if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming, whether you like it or not." So Thunberg's speech at the UN climate conference was found very inspirational. Neubauer, the subject of this rhetoric and practice assignment, was at the UN climate conference, and throughout the whole day she was saddened and disappointed by what was going on. She felt that the fossil fuel industries and the political leaders were doing everything they could to prevent real change from happening. So when Neubauer saw a young person like herself give this powerful speech at the UN climate conference, she became inspired to play an active role in a Fridays for Future strike with other young people. So this was the first time Neubauer had ever organized a public demonstration or protest. She had no money, she had no resources for this protest, and she had no idea what a climate strike really was. So her and other young people did what they were good at. They spread information about this Fridays for Future strike to other young people via mass text. They were texting hundreds and hundreds of people day and night, trying to raise awareness and trying to garner support and get people out there, and they organized their first climate strike via WhatsApp. Throughout Neubauer's TED Talk, she talks about how change needs to happen and how, it's not just science, it's a matter of activism and advocating for what you believe in and looking out for the people around you and for the next generation. So this, I thought, was one of the most important components of Neubauer's speech at the TED Youth Talk. For any of that change to happen, the world needs to stop relying on 1 or 2 or 3 million school strikers to sort this out. Yes, we are great. We are going to keep going, and we are going to go places that no one ever expected us. Yes, but we are not the limit. We are the start. This is not a job for a single generation. This is a job for humanity. This is when all eyes are on you. For this change to happen, we will have to get 1 million things sorted. It's an incredibly complex thing, after all, but there are some things that everyone can get started with. The bad news first: if you thought I would tell you now to cycle more or eat less meat, to fly less or to go secondhand shopping, sorry, but this is not that easy. Here comes the good news. You are more than consumers and shoppers. Even though the industry would like you to keep yourselves limited to that, no. Me and you, we are all political beings, and we can all be part of this answer. We can all be something that many people call climate activists. So what are the first steps? 4 first steps that are essential to getting everything else done. 4 first steps that everyone can get started with. 4 first steps that decide about everything that can happen after. So here I've summarized Neubauer's proposed steps to change and steps to essentially become a climate activist yourself. So the first step, Neubauer says, is crucial, is to drastically reframe what your understanding of a climate activist is, because everyone thinks that a climate activist is a scientist who understands every aspect of global warming, who understands, the mathematical algorithms that go behind how fast the glaciers are melting and how fast the temperature is rising. But that's not necessarily true. Anyone can be a climate activist. So next, she says you have to get out of a convenience or a comfort zone. You have to get away from business as usual, and just kind of start holding people accountable for taking care of the world around us. So things that you can do or ask yourself in order to start implementing this change. Is your employer on track of meeting the Paris Agreement? Does your local parliament or government know that you care about climate change and climate reform and that you want this to be a priority in every election? Does your best friend know about this? So just making sure people are aware of what's going on in the world is one of the very first steps to becoming a climate activist and making sure the world around you is aware of what's going on. The third step, she says, is to join forces. The more you are, the harder it is for people to justify a system that has no future. Power is not something that you either have or don't have. It's something you take or you leave to others, and it grows once you share it. So basically, there are strength in numbers, and I think that's very evident in the numbers of young people that are out protesting climate change. And then the fourth step is to take yourself more seriously. If you want to, you can have a say in this. You can be part of the change, and you can be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So essentially, Neubauer is saying you do, as a young person or as whatever generation you're from, you do have the power to make a change, and to sit idly by is to allow this to continue happening. So, as I mentioned, Neubauer's speech was at a TED Youth Talk. So, it's clear that this message was delivered specifically to young people. And as a younger person, I found it very influential and something that, I don't know about the rest of you if you've watched it or just from the little snippets that I've included in this presentation, but it inspired me to want to take a more active role in climate activism. So this just goes to show me that persuasion and rhetoric can potentially have a domino effect. And what I mean by that is that through her speech, Neubauer exemplified that the power of persuasion is prominent. She highlighted how she was inspired to take a more active role in the climate change movement after hearing Thunberg speak at the UN Climate Conference. And so she did. She went out and she protested. And then she realized that that wasn't enough, that she had to play an active role in making more climate activists. So now she's out there and she's giving speeches where then she could inspire other people to go out there and give speeches themselves. And like I said, it could just have this domino effect of creating a climate activist who then goes on to create more climate activists. In conclusion, some of the major takeaways that I have from analyzing this rhetorical text, um, some of the critical studies that might be developed as a result of uh, speeches like this, people could look at how similar messages are perceived when the audience and the speaker share similar demographics. So as I mentioned, Neubauer is a 23-year-old. She's from a younger generation, and she's giving this speech at a TED Youth Talk. So one of the biggest issues that these younger climate change activists are acknowledging is that older generations aren't participating in the conversation. And I find it a little bit ironic that she's trying to garner support from older generations, but she's speaking at a TED Youth Talk. And I don't exactly know the demographics of the audience of those talks, but it just kind of made me wonder, how can younger people tailor their speech to be better perceived by older generations? What is the setting and what is the verbiage that they should use in order to garner further support from older generations? So additional information that I thought was needed for this speech, um, Neubauer makes a statement that to be a climate change activist. You don't have to know all the data. You don't have to sit behind computers and books and know all of the science and math that goes into the increasing temperature of the earth. But I don't fully agree with that, which makes it difficult then to have such a large group of climate activists. Presenting more data, I feel, could be more helpful in creating a persuasive argument. Climate activists should be knowledgeable in the facts of climate change, because how can they influence others to join the cause if they aren't well versed in the climate change rhetoric? And societal forces, I think that this kind of goes back to the first bullet here, where this talks about the need for older generations to join climate activism, but this message is catered for a younger audience. So how would this speech do at a TED Talk where it's not specifically catered to youth? Again, does the verbiage have to change? What, these younger people they're angry and they're invoking anger in other young people because we feel that older generations are neglecting us and they're being careless in neglecting taking care of the earth. So that's effective for a lot of younger people, but older generations look at it and say, this anger isn't warranted. So how do we change the message in order for older generations to also be inspired to join this cause? I had a little bit of a hard time trying to apply communication theories that I've studied here at UW-Whitewater to Neubauer's speech. But she does, I believe, emphasize how important it is for a united front and for large groups to protest in droves, which is why I thought groupthink might be a good theory that she could further elaborate on. Another theory that I thought was touched on is cognitive dissonance, which provides an explanation for how beliefs and behavior change attitudes, focusing on the effects of inconsistency among ways of knowing beliefs, judgments, and thoughts. I just thought cognitive dissonance kind of ties into how one generation has certain attitudes and beliefs towards climate change, and the older generations have a little bit of a different attitude and belief towards climate change, and how there is this dissonance between the two groups, and it would be an effective communication strategy to figure out how to tie those groups together and how to kind of get their attitudes and their beliefs to overlap. And then the last theory I mentioned was structuration theory. This isn't so much a component of Neubauer's speech, but I saw that this was, I think, prevalent in her initial reaction at the UN climate conference before she heard Thunberg speak. She is talking about how corporations are resisting change and they're not really allowing anything to happen in a way that's beneficial to the environment. And so structuration theory is where powers structure and guide decision making that takes place in these organizations. So basically the driving force behind certain corporation decisions is money, and they are neglecting all of the harmful effects and all of the greenhouse gas emissions and things like that, because the structure that is guiding the decision making is money. So to conclude this presentation, I do have a few discussion questions that I'd like to pose to the class. Essentially, the first question, I just want you all to think about how Louisa Neubauer mentions that she's inspired by Greta when she spoke at the UN Climate Conference. Do you feel, after hearing what I've told you about the speech, or if you've watched it yourself, that Louisa's speech packed that same punch and that it's powerful enough to inspire someone to become a climate activist on the protesting side as well as on the public speaking side? Are there any elements missing from this speech that you think would have made it more persuasive? And third, the theories that I provided in the last slide could potentially be attributed to framing of this rhetoric. Do you agree? And did Neubauer take any sort of theoretical approach in developing this communication? Thank you all for listening. Again, if you haven't had a chance to watch this video, I strongly encourage it. So thank you all, and I look forward to our discussion.